Good evening from Vietnam. Good morning to you, Professor Igor. Thanks a lot for spending your morning. I believe it's a Monday morning also to join our program and share your amazing stories with our global audience. And on behalf of the listeners around the world, I want to say thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Professor Igor, you haven't been to Vietnam, so also please accept our sincere invitation. So if you and your family ever travel to this part of the world, please let us know and we'll make sure that we take you around town, okay?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
And since you're an expert in culture, in our culture, in our Vietnamese culture, it's an honor if we can have you to do a little introduction about who you are and the works that you are doing. Can you do that for our audience, please?
Well, I'm a professor of psychology, and I study the social psychological processes and how the mind works. And some of my work takes me in understanding our societies and how they develop and unfold. And the other part of my work is about the decision-making process and how people try to navigate challenging situations. What kind of decision strategies can help you make wiser decisions. And that includes also foresight, so how to make accurate estimates of what may be best thing to do in the future. So roughly those are the two topics, the cultural change on the one hand, how societies change, and wisdom on the other hand.
Wow. Professor Igor, it's not fair for us because you have a really amazing journey, but you introduce it to us only in less than 1 minute of the time. So is that okay if we can travel time together so that we can explore how that journey took you to what you're doing now?
Sure.
Alrighty. So when I was young, I always wanted to become an astronaut, and wear the suit and jump in different planets seems to be very cool for me. But life didn't give me any chance to do close to the thing I wanted to do. So I want to know, as a young little boy, what was your dream about your future, though?
That's a very good question. I don't know. I probably also wanted to be, well, at that time, a cosmonaut because I was born in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and there people talk about cosmonauts instead of astronauts. I think I also want to be an architect.
Ah,
I had this real fascination with drawing houses and how to sort of what a cool house would look like and so on. So those were the two things. I mean, I think the third one was I want to be a fireman. I mean, but as every child, very generic. I mean, I think the architect was a kind of a little bit more unique. There was something appealing about creating something that would potentially stand longer and stay there after you're gone. Now I'm thinking about it now. I mean, I'm not sure if that's what drew me to it, but it seemed kind of cool to build houses and to figure out how to make them beautiful. Yeah, so those were the three things, I guess.
what's the first thing?
A cosmonaut.
Cosmonaut. What is a
Want to go to
cosmonaut?
space or pilot? Actually, I want to be a pilot. I think that's yeah. My grandma reminded me several years ago, when she was still alive, that I wanted to be a pilot when I was little.
Wow. So out of the three, none of them related to what you are doing at the moment. All right. So along
Well,
the
I do travel a lot, so I mean, I do certainly contribute towards the climate crisis by taking the airplane. But I have never been in the cockpit, so you're right. I didn't really live up to the expectations, and I don't build houses.
Wow. But you do have one thing that your works will last even if you're not no longer in this planet, right? So your works will last for the people to learn about the wisdom, they learn about the cultural change for them to continue the research to get better. So at least there's also something in common between what you wanted when you were young to what you are doing at the moment. So from there to what you are doing now, can you tell us how the journey took place until you decided to go into the field of social psychology?
Oh well, there's always a story one can tell
Mm.
create a narrative, and then there is the reality that actually takes place. And sometimes one confuses which one is which. In my case, the story that I could tell, which I don't think is quite the reality, but certainly has influenced me, is that the fact that I did grow up in a time of societal collapse.
Mm.
I was born in the Soviet Union, then it became Ukraine, then uh, there were all sorts of changes that, as a teenager, as a sort of somebody who is going through puberty, I was very sensitive to who are the heroes, who are the enemies. Uh, those things have changed. I was a history buff, and suddenly history books were completely different. I think similar things have happened in Vietnam, of course, over the course of the history. And that was number one. Then the second thing is that my family moved to Germany. So I became an immigrant and became very sensitive to status differences.
Mm.
The paradox of having much more food and security than I had before in Ukraine, but being viewed as garbage people because I was an immigrant from Eastern Europe and
Really?
not. Yeah. So I mean, in a sense, like all immigrants, in some societies are not viewed as the most desirable. So then if you pick up a phone and try to find an apartment, and I was able to speak the language better than my parents, you end up um, right away getting rejected as soon as you say, "Do you have an apartment available?" Because they hear your accent or they hear your name, and they right away deduce that you may be from somewhere from Eastern Europe, and that's just not desirable. Also, I was aware of prejudice from the early age
Mm.
because of that. I was aware of sort of cultural differences. And I tried to understand why people in different cultures think differently. I mean, so for me, that was very interesting. I mean, that was already in Ukraine, that was quite interesting, and then certainly in Germany. Now, whether those things made me become a social psychologist, I
Mm.
don't know. I mean, those are just part of my history. Um, the reality is that I wanted to be a dancer. And, I was really passionate about that. I was doing competitive ballroom dancing, and I was dreaming of, of maybe doing something with that. But unfortunately, my body didn't really uh, go along, and at some point, I couldn't really dance anymore. I couldn't even walk anymore properly. I had crutches when I was finishing high school, and I had to rethink what I want to do. And psychology seemed like an interesting topic, in part because I was always interested in sort of how does mind work,
Oh.
what do people think about, and so on. And I was not really thinking of social psychology in particular. I was just, one thing led to another. I thought psychology is cool. I'm going to study that. It's kind of like philosophy, but a little bit more practical. It's about the human mind. And then I went to a university um, that seemed kind of very nice place to be, further away from home. Maybe it was one of the motivating factors. And there, the topic of culture, when that came up in a course on social psychology, was something that really appealed to me, probably because of my upbringing,
Mm.
um, but also because somehow it made sense. And it seems like so cool to think about sort of the way how we feel, the way how we think, the way how we behave may look so different in one cultural environment versus another. And so paradoxically, despite the fact that I actually didn't like any of the social psychology content outside of this cultural content, I thought it was kind of weird. They were all based on very small observations, and they were all college students in this kind of cutesy, counterintuitive studies. Basically, a lot of memorization. It didn't seem like there was some kind of a grand understanding of theory. But the culture part had seemed like more of a theoretical backbone to it. It seemed so profound. And so I stuck with the social psychology, even though I hated the rest of the course. I really didn't like those studies. And in fact, I mean, now fast forwarding, now that's the sentiment that a lot of my colleagues have. We have in social psychology, replication crisis, questioning about whether those small cutesy studies were all even real. But to me, sort of at that moment, I was really interested in culture. I was really interested in the cognitive process of understanding how mind works and in emotions. And I ended up becoming a social psychologist. So that a lot of it is serendipitous. I decided to go to the school where this thing happened, and I guess the instructor probably was very exciting when she was talking about this particular topic, and that probably caught my attention more, being influenced by the teachers and the mentors. And then there was an opportunity to go to the United States as an exchange student, and I applied for a scholarship. Um, and it turned out that the three places where I could go with a scholarship from my university in Germany, one of them was specializing on culture. And so I was really excited about that. It could have been that they would have specialized in something entirely different, but there was this very strong tradition at the University of Michigan in the United States of focusing on culture and psychology. And so I was very lucky. Again, a lot of sort of chance of being able to award it that scholarship. There was one out of it was highly competitive, like one out of three for the whole university, I think. And then I came to Michigan, and the rest is history. And I ended up staying there. Never went back. And I ended up doing the PhD there. So this is how it went about. But so if you would ask me, are the cultural things in my childhood sort of did I become a social psychologist because of those events, the collapse of the Soviet Union, or moving to Germany and me experiencing prejudice? I mean, it makes sense, but I don't think so. I mean, I could have become many other things. And as life has it, it's just like one thing leads to another. And then sometimes there are these opportunities. And maybe you have some certain inclinations, and maybe because of my history had an inclination. It certainly was not a conscious decision to focus on things because of X. It seems like I was just flowing somewhere and ended up at this destination.
Wow, wow. Professor Igor, thanks a lot for sharing that. I want to bring you back onto the moment that you transfer your family moving from Ukraine onto to Germany. All right. So
Yeah.
you're an outsider coming to the country and not speaking the language well and stuff like that. So how was a typical day for a young boy Igor back then?
Ah, well, there are two phases. Oh, actually, there are three phases.
Hmm.
There are some things I didn't mention. One thing was, so first when we moved into some kind of a camp for refugees because we were sort of came as refugees. And So these were former military barracks. It was kind of an interesting experience. It was like a summer camp, but with not only us, but also many other adults and their families. And I mean, I was very sheltered, I think, when I was younger in Ukraine, despite all the upheaval. My family sort of protected me from various experiences and, let's put it this way, socioeconomic diversity. So I didn't think about sort of, I went to a decent school and where other kids were very nice. And suddenly I had to go to this school where some kids just didn't care at all about the state. So this kind of refugee camp school, I think most of them just didn't care at all. They didn't even think that the knowledge is interesting or school is interesting, and so just like having that experience and at the same time the freedom, that was cool. But it was weird, and it was only temporary. It was for about a month, and then 3 weeks actually. And then we moved to West Germany, to Mülheim an der Ruhr, um, where we stayed for, I think, another 3 or 4 months. And I was, we were looking for an apartment in the meantime. And so, like, learning the language. So I went to school with other Germans where I don't understand 80% of what they're saying. I do remember that. And I would come home and I have this thick book. This was before, you know, Google Translate can do things on the fly for you, or ChatGPT or whatever. And instead of that, you have this thick dictionary, and you try to translate the little assignment, one word after another, and make sense of it. I do vividly remember that, sitting into the night with the dictionary, just to make sense of the instructions of a sentence. Um, and so some things I couldn't do at all. But with time, it sort of became easy. And some other things I could do, like I could do math. As soon as I understood the instruction, that was easy,
Uh-huh.
or some of the other courses. So I do remember those nights. It was all weird. It was all strange. It was an entirely different ecosystem, entirely different culture. Getting from the buses, the trains look different. I had to take a bus and a train to get to school, which I never had to do before, because again, like, I have this very sheltered life where I would get off the house and then or the apartment and walk for 10 minutes by foot, and I will be at school. And suddenly I had to, traverse uh, half a city in one of the most densely populated areas in Germany, in Europe, as a matter of fact. And this was quite an experience. Um, so that was the second phase. And then the third phase is, so we moved to another city, to Essen, which was sitting next to where I grew up. And my mom was diagnosed with cancer,
Oh.
and her stomach was removed. She had a really bad terminal diagnosis. She did survive for the next 5 years, but it was pretty bad. And that sort of the experience of my dad was trying to get a job, and so he was either taking German courses, or he then found a job where he would be living somewhere else as an engineer, doing to sort of work there, and come back home on the weekends. So then I'm the oldest boy. Mom has it pretty rough, and I have two young brothers. So it was an interesting time in many ways, and so that also influenced my um, upbringing as a teenager, because then suddenly the sort of the age of innocence is over, and you sort of start, you're becoming much more familiar with the hospital system, and with the fact that we will all die one day, I guess. And just generally the notion of suffering that you may not be thinking about, and pain. And this was even before I had my hosts of experiences. I was then diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 18, and had my fair share of pain then later. So yeah, that was sort of those were the experiences. So three phases of moving, and the first one was, wow, this is also different. That some kids really don't care about education, and they're coming from very different background, clearly. Second one about just being in a completely different environment, it's so widely different, and not understanding a single word. So that then of course came, like, I did feel sense of agency, sort of having learning more and more, and suddenly I was able to speak, and suddenly I was able to master tasks, and suddenly I was able to master tasks better than in German, in sort of the class on German language, better than my classmates. And that was after 2 years. That was kind of really remarkable, and certainly gave me a sense of mastery and competence that I don't think I had. And then at the same time, the situation with my mother, and what that entailed. Um, so yeah, also some of the experiences.
Professor Igor, I went to the US in 2001, and with zero background in English. I came to a community of Vietnamese and stayed there, in which I wasn't belonging to that community as well because of the political point of view, before 1975, and they thought of me, coming from different, political side of and so I can share some pains. I can share some, shock of the culture change and change,
Right.
like you had before also. So what did you do during that rough time for you to keep up with the speed and then change? Because a lot of people in the upcoming years, I believe that a lot of people also will have to face with a new change in in cultural differences. So what did you do back then, though?
You mean in terms of sort of how do they
Yes,
cope with the fact that
cope with
the culture
change.
is entirely different and everything?
Ah.
I mean, I think I just thought it was kind of cool and interesting. I mean, before moving to Germany, I had these very vivid dreams about what would it be like to be in a country where you don't understand a single word. So here's a little side story. When I was in Ukraine, I thought that English was a torture language that people created to torture me because I hated it. I just and the reason it was like I had this instructor, the teacher in my sort of middle school, who only used this kind of classic memorization approach where I didn't have any experience. I didn't see any people who actually would speak English. This was just like you learn words, you memorize them, you write them down, and it seemed highly abstract. And I really thought this was just a torture. I mean, there's nobody, no, in the sane mind would be speaking this language because there are so many exceptions. I mean, this is so illogical. And I started learning German before I came, in part, like, and this maybe have promoted this vivid dream because I thought, well, actually, I am moving to a country where people will be speaking a different language. And so a year before I came, I started learning very intensively by myself on the free time. I went through sort of the curricula of, I got the textbooks for German as a foreign language in Ukrainian for the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and I think ninth grades. And so I went through them in about 3 months. I just did it. This was my pastime. And so I had a little bit of a vocabulary, but I was really worried what will happen when I come because I will not be able to speak the language. So I tried to mentally prepare myself. So I tried, okay, I'll learn a little bit. And so I came and I was able to speak a tiny bit, just while I was the person answering the phone and making the phone calls, even though I was by far not fluent, proficient at all. But yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I was kind of excited. So because I was learning, I was really excited. I was really, I mean, I have never been outside of Eastern Europe at that moment. I've never been on a plane. Well, yeah, we drove. I never drove further east than Western Ukraine. And so for me, suddenly being in Western Europe and experiencing an entirely different culture was just fascinating. I couldn't sort of get enough of different cultures. And I mean, ignoring all the prejudice and everything else, or classism, I would say, and everything else that I have encountered, as many of us encounter, ignoring the challenges of cultural differences. I was so fascinated by the buildings, by the roads, by the way how people behaved, by the way how sort of they walked on the street, what they were wearing. I'm not trying to make it a positive picture. It was just different, and I found it so cool. So for me, that sort of the coolness factor, I think, trumped everything else, all the negative sides that I probably also experienced.
Wow. I can connect the dot from from your upbringings to the works that you do in terms of social of social cultural change, modeling cultural change at the moment. I'm trying to connect in another dot which is linked it to the wisdom, the other part that you are doing at the moment. So when was in your childhood on your way to grow up, you had the desire to know how the minds work, how people think and stuff like
Yeah.
that? Since when?
Well, I mean, just how the mind work, that's something that I've been wondering about probably since I was 11,
11.
10 or 11. Yeah. I do remember I was in a summer camp and I somehow started walking with some other kid and we started thinking about sort of like talking about things and you just like forget, like suddenly that I forget the time and we're just talking about the minds and how people behave, and I found it fascinating. So like those type of conversations. Um, but you know, if you ask me, like again, like did this lead to wisdom research? No, it could have led to me becoming a counselor or a social worker or a philosopher. Some people think I'm a philosopher, but and then they're disappointed that I'm actually using empirical methods and scientific methods. Uh, but I don't know. I mean, you know, some people say, well, you know, the path to wisdom leads through adversity. So if you seem to have experienced a few things in your life. Like, okay, sure. So is that the reason why you study wisdom? It's like, no. It's all very serendipitous. I mean, uh, understanding the mind and understanding how to make difficult decisions and foresight and be open-minded to different experiences, potentially not judging others right away. All those things, yeah, I mean, if that's what wisdom is about, yeah, I've been interested in them partially because of my personal history for a while. But like the topic of wisdom, that label, that came totally serendipitously, and that specifically when I came to Michigan and then I wanted to do research on culture, the person I reached out to who was sort of the leader at that time, he's retired by now, but the leader in the god of social psychology who was actually interested in cultural research. So naturally I came to him and I said, okay, I want to do culture and I'm free. You don't even have to pay me. I'll just do things for you. Just tell me what to do. Tell
Oh.
me. And he's like, and he's, how about wisdom? It's like, okay, sure, sign me up. And I mean, it has nothing to do with culture, but I mean, I started appreciating the connection a bit later. So what he was doing, what he was studying, and how that connects to wisdom. So he gave me that sort of as a task, as a first task, and so I started developing it with some colleagues. And one thing led to another. But of course, I mean, I since then have put in my own interest in sort of like understanding the mind, understanding how people think and reason, understanding challenges. I certainly put it in the research on wisdom, maybe more so than before. But yeah, a lot of serendipity.
Wow. So how long did you work with him on the research of wisdom?
Well, I didn't work with him. I worked mostly with my colleagues. He was there, and then he was gone. And we had a lot of freedom. Let's put it this way. He sort of like gave us the direction, and then um, we did things mostly uh, by ourselves. Then later, I mean, that's not entirely true. The first project was with him, of course. So he was my PhD advisor. So
Ah.
I was with him for the next 5 years. But as I said, I ended up also working with other people because I tried to expand my horizon. And because he was gone for at least 2 years, in North American academia, you have this concept of sabbatical, and he being a senior, very famous person, took on several of those sabbaticals. I think I came in the moment when he was about to retire, and
Oh.
he would have probably retired, but then I was kind of very exciting, and so he maybe out of pity, I said, all right, I'll stay on, but I will be gone for 2 years. So, which is fine. It's a good deal, but it also led me to work with several other wonderful people who imprinted on me.
So that was when you in the PhD the program, and then
That's right.
and then it was given to you by random by a professor who is about to retire, the topic of wisdom, but then you carry on that topic with you until now and make yourself
Right.
well known into that space.
No, stuck with it. Yeah. Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I mean, you start working on something,
Mm.
and then you realize, you may realize that, well, this is actually super boring, or you may realize, well, actually, that's not too bad. I mean, there's a little bit of philosophy, there's a little bit of culture, different cultural traditions, and boy, there's so many mistakes that people have been making. I mean, the way how they would design things. So, like, a lot of wisdom research was coming from a different perspective. So I was coming from this kind of experimental social psychology perspective.
Mm.
And nobody in social psychology, experimental psychology, did anything on wisdom. Most of it was coming from this fairly naive idea that, well, wisdom comes with age. Let's just show it. It's like, okay. So, and then, oops, we can show it. But they were coming mostly from developmental psychology, so from research on aging. And those scholars used very different methods. Um, the notion of a good study would look different. They would not be conducting necessarily sort of experimental methods or track people paradoxically over time. And so I thought, coming from a doctoral program in social psychology, that I could use slightly different methods. So I thought, like, okay, let's maybe take a look and figure out what we can do here, and then applied some of what I learned, and it revealed some different results from prior research. And so I guess I got stuck with it both because I'm stubborn, and also because it seems like you could just keep on doing it, and there's it's never going to stop. But I would say, I think it just, like, one thing led to another, and I found some interesting aspects in it. I wouldn't say that it's sort of my calling to study wisdom, or something like that, but it's a broad enough topic that even when you sort of shift gears from one feature to another, you can never get tired of it. If I want to focus on morality, I could study morality. If I want to focus on sort of just general, very basic decision-making processes, I can do that. If I want to study how people change over time, I could do that. If I want to study how people sort of navigate adverse experiences, I could study that, and it would still be all within wisdom. So, so the topic is very broad. So even though it sounds like I stuck with it, I actually have been moving around all the time. It's just like it doesn't look like it because of the vast expanse of this topic.
Wow.
But yeah, but at the same time, it's convenient to do something that seems like not many other people are doing. It's also very hard because then you have to explain to them what you're doing. But yeah, that was probably one of the reasons as well.
Wow. Wow. So, Professor Igor, I like to ask because a lot of our listeners on the program are the people who wants to develop themselves, to grow to the next level, to help them overcome the things that holding them back, and making change in understanding themselves better. Is a good way for them to start the changing, right? And you have been on the field of this wisdom and demystifying wisdom, right? I want to start with the baby question first. In your profession, what is wisdom defined? How is it defined?
Oh, well, I mean, we mostly focus, I mean, we in work in my lab, mostly focuses now on sort of the types of strategies, cognitive strategies. And by cognitive, I mean like those kind of like that guide your thinking and guide your emotion regulation, guides what you should or want to focus on. So your motives. So that's what I mean by strategies. So there's a set of strategies that help you sort of navigate challenging situations. Imagine you encounter something that's very hard. There's multiple conflicting interests. For instance, should you do this or should I do this? Should I help my mom or should I focus on myself? Or should I buy this big fancy car or should I save? Should I focus on my personal development? Should I focus on my physical development? Or should I just relax and watch a movie or go meet with friends? It's a lot of times in our lives, either in the context of sort of like, this could be a stressful situation, it could be a highly adverse situation, or it could be just a mundane situation from one day to another. You face those type of not necessarily conflicts, but challenging decisions. And I think across many societies, many cultures, be it in Vietnam, in Germany, in the United States, in Canada, in South America, when you ask somebody, what is wisdom? Or who is wise? People would say, well, it's the person who can do those things. When it comes to this type of challenging situation, they would know what to do. So, okay, but how? How would they figure out what to do? Well, they know. I mean, they have this set of tools. It's like, okay, interesting. And so I'm interested in this set of tools and this set of strategies. So when I'm talking about wisdom, I mostly focus on the, not necessarily on who we would select as wise, because I think that that's a very tricky thing. And I will tell you why in a second. But I focus more on sort of this very local, how do we make decisions in such a way that under many circumstances will probably help you. Because what happens, like when you are facing this kind of very conflictual interests, or you don't know what to do, priorities, you sort of zero in and you sort of forget about the context. You sort of like, you prefer one, you discount the other. You focus on the one that seems easier or more appealing at a given moment. You forget about sort of long-term consequences. You focus on yourself, you forget about other people. You focus on what's most immediately apparent outcome, you forget about other possible outcomes. So how do you get beyond that? How do you help yourself make a decision that would allow you to keep this focus broad enough not to succumb to the fallacy of just acting on what's in front of you? So in various philosophical schools, in various cultures, I think this type of strategies are being appreciated. At least that's my claim. And so when I talk about wisdom, when I talk about wise decisions or wise reasoning, I specifically focus on that because I think that's at the core, and that's something that we can study, that we can develop empirical tools, methods to assess, to understand. In contrast to that, for instance, another approach would be, I would just ask, well, let me nominate somebody who is wise and let's try to figure out what is it that made them wise in their lives. And that's very, very hard because, like, if I ask somebody in Vietnam right now, you will get very different answer than you would have gotten 50 years ago. If I asked somebody in Russia, I would get some people nominate Stalin. If I asked somebody in China, they would say Mao. If I asked somebody in the US, they would say George Washington. But how about Stalin? I was like, are you crazy? So it's that type of perspective for sort of who is wise, whom are you going to for advice? Well, sometimes it's your grandma. Is that just because she's so wise? Well, no, it's because the person whom you trust and you develop some kind of rapport. And so I find that approach a bit difficult because of all sorts of biases and post hoc interpretation. I'm not saying that it's not valuable to know who in your culture is considered to be wise. I think it's a very cool project in its own right. I just don't think that that will tell you much about what you should be doing in a challenging situation, which is ultimately what most of us care about, right? We want to know, how do we make sense of ourselves, and how do we make sense of challenges that we are facing? And for me, that's what wisdom is mostly about.
Professor Igor, I believe that fundamentally, as human beings, we want to get wiser, we want to make smarter decisions, but there's a lot of distractions out there that, intendedly or unintendedly, that affect our ability to think and to grow, right? So if you can share with us some practical tools that could help us every time that we face with situations, we can use, one or two tools that can help us to uh, make decisions that help us instead of hurting us.
Oh, well, that's very, very tricky, in part because I'm not a practitioner.
Oh.
So I'm a scientist, basic scientist, so I don't really study tools. Like, I can tell you that the majority of the things that people talk about, they either, they probably all local. So number one is, like, there's no tool that works in all contexts, in all situations. It seems trivial, but it's true. You can't just. I can tell you, for instance, well, if only you were able to practice some mindfulness and distance yourself, to center yourself from the situation. What does that mean? Well, take a step back, ask yourself, maybe in critical moments, uh, what would somebody else do? Or what would the other self do? Like imagine yourself viewing yourself from a third person. Not all of those things I've studied in my research empirically, and they do help in challenging situations in the heat of the moment when you're dealing with interpersonal conflict with somebody. They do seem to help a little bit to take this kind of broader perspective, to approach things in a less sort of insular fashion, where you expand your scope. But I would not recommend those things for everybody all the time, because there are certainly moments in your life where, imagine you're making passionate love to your partner. I mean, you don't want to distance yourself from that moment. Imagine you're playing a wonderful game with friends, or you're engaged in some kind of a sport activity that you really love, or you play guitar. I mean, you don't want to distance yourself from that moment. You want to be in that moment.
Yeah.
You want to be the self. So you want to focus on those experiences. You don't want to, like, imagine being this kind of abstract self, viewing yourself from the side. So in some situations it helps. In other situations it doesn't. And I mean, I think the true understanding of wisdom is to figure out which one is which. When you can apply one versus another. That's a very, very challenging task. So I don't know if I can tell you a general set of rules. I think, the centering, that is the cornerstone of various streams of mindfulness practice, be it in Buddhism, or in some ways it's also present in various yoga practices, or in other sort of more Western-oriented traditions of reflecting on yourself. I'm not sure about prayer, but simply sort of reflective exercises that sort of present in such traditions as Stoicism. I do think that they do help, and if you can sort of engage in them, if you practice this type of meditation, you probably will develop habitually this approach. But even that is context specific. I just talked to Sintel Segal about this, like one of the world's leaders in mindfulness research. And we thought about sort of, like this monks who in Vietnam or in other parts of Southeast Asia would spend a month in seclusion, where they will not be talking to anybody, where they would be mostly focusing on studying and less on the food will be limited. They're not talking to anybody, and so on and so forth. And so in that moment, they like show this incredible self-control. They're all devoted to the meditation. They are the masters of this craft of decentering. And then there are moments when they come back into the real world and they succumbing to all sorts of things. Not everybody, of course, but like this, the same temptations that we all succumb to. And in fact, what Cinda was saying, that sometimes probably anecdotally, some of them succumbing to more issues than you and I would, because they don't know, they haven't practiced of how to live in this world, because they focus so much on living in that secluded world where they are the champions. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that it's all context variable, and you have to be very, very careful. A lot of it is often in the balancing act about figuring out what strategy, what situation would help in this environment versus in this other environment that you find yourself, and figuring out what the differences between the two. But that is an ongoing sort of study. I mean, so I can't tell you, because for every single person it may look somewhat different. But if I were to give one, I guess I would say decentering, and some form of mindfulness practice that includes decentering.
Beautiful. Thank you. And then I think that the mindfulness one is not something that working for me, because every time that I sat down, I could not concentrate. But it's something that I need to really, really improve and get improved on. Professor Igor, I have a few more questions before we end this conversation. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And then one mission that my wife and we've been doing is we ask all of the experts joining the show to share one thing that fascinating to us is about thinking. All right, because we believe that our ability to think these days got so many distractions, and it makes the thinking got diminishing instead of increasing. So for us to get wiser, at least we have to think better. All right, so in your practice, over the years, how have you been growing your ability to think?
Oh, I don't know if I have. I mean, I feel like it's shrinking over the years. Well, I mean, okay. One thing that I do notice that as you get older, uh, I don't know if you notice that in yourself too, but like you feel like certain things repeat themselves, and then just like you start recognizing patterns.
Yep.
And so that type of insights, like, oh, okay, that that too will pass. That's okay. That's happened before. Just let it go. They say not worth fighting, right? So those type of things, and sort of that type of recognition, they do come to some extent with experience. But of course, not everybody recognizes those repeated experiences. I started recognizing it recently. I mean, I think like maybe in the last 3-4 years. So I think that helps my thinking. Those type of notions of insight, figuring out how to pick your fights, so to say, what to engage in, what to sort of let go, where to direct your attention and your energy, and where to just step back and let other people handle it. Like also this kind of insight that, I mean, it's very trivial, but sort of like it will work out. You don't have to sweat every single thing. Like the small things, it will work out. I mean, I used to be like, I need to be obsessing about everything because I want to make sure that it's up to highest standards and everything. But I was like, no, just let it go. I mean, it will be fine. So that doesn't really improve my thinking, I think, but it does free up resources to focus on thinking about other things, because it's like, unfortunately, everything takes time, and every time you have a trade-off in terms of a temporal trade-off. You either focus on this or you focus on something else. And I think like a lot of sort of ways to improve your thinking is to deliberately figure out what you should or should not be focusing on, to channel your attention. And I think, that's sort of like one strategy. I mean, the other one is have a routine and good habits. I mean, I'm very bad at that. My wife tells me all the time. But, like getting regular sleep, go to bed around the same time, not to overdo anything that you like. It's a very trivial thing, like, like moderation to some extent. It doesn't mean abstinence from everything, but those type of routines and moderation and good habits, they improve your the cognitive health as well.
Mm.
They maintain they keep you sharp, um, and not overly fatigued. Anyways, so those are a few things, and exercising, I guess. I mean, that's again like trivial things. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think some scholars would say that either in mindfulness or in this kind of stoicism, sort of you have this approaches where you really spend a lot of time sharpening your reflective abilities. I don't know if that's necessarily the only path to it, because I mean, again, like we talked about context specificity. I would say that in some situations you probably just want to sometimes go outside and be with friends and then
Mm.
go engage in some kind of stimulating activity and close your computer and just do something fun and exciting together.
Yeah,
All of those things can in turn have benefits for your cognitive health as well.
absolutely, absolutely. Since we've been talking about time travel in the past, let's travel to the past one last time before we move forward to the future, okay? So, if you can talk to yourself when you first moved to Germany, what message would you talk to the young Igor back then, though?
Take your mom to the doctor right away,
Mm.
and to a different doctor,
Two
not
different
the one
doctors.
who tells her.
Wow.
No, I mean, because I mean, her case was that she was complaining about stomach aches, and instead of, I mean, that may be another reason why I became a psychologist, or different, a critical psychologist, I guess, because the physician, instead of diagnosing or actually doing tests, just told her that she probably misses her relatives, and tried to do a pseudo psychoanalysis with her, and that led to it got really bad. So I mean, I guess that would be my advice, but I mean, alas, that's not something that we can do.
Sorry about that bad experience back then. And let's move to the future. Okay, Professor Igor.
Okay.
Yes. If we know your past, we know the works that you are doing at the moment. Our audience will be eager to know, is there anything exciting you are working on that you want to share with us so we can celebrate with you in advance?
Oh well, I mean, exciting is always in the eyes of the beholder. I mean, I find everything exciting, and that when I'm working on it, and then I'm done, and I'm like, well, I'm excited about something new. So I don't know if that's universally applicable. I have been working the interface of artificial intelligence and how to use it to study uh, the wisdom of how to improve human decision making when you sort of, for instance, talk to an artificial agent. So maybe doing a little bit of. I'm very excited about that. But overall, I'm very excited about figuring out uh, what are the basic understandings of what is a good decision, what is a wise decision in different cultures, and what are the different theories people in Vietnam or in Central Africa or in South America would have about what you should do under different circumstances. Unfortunately, we have very little understanding about that right now.
Hmm.
Most of the work in that realm is all focusing on North Americans, English-speaking North Americans or Western Europeans. And then sometimes they make sweeping generalizations about all of humanity, and that's not doesn't sound right. Somebody who comes from a different culture and kind of devoted his life to some extent to understand cultural variability and diversity, that's something that we can work on. So I'm actually excited about embarking on that adventure and try to help shed some more light towards this
Beautiful.
topic using sort of modern techniques.
Beautiful, beautiful. I have one last question, and this is totally on your own personal opinion, so we don't talk about professional opinion here, okay? So, with all the tools, with all the technologies that's amazing out there, do you think across the world we are making better decisions than we were before?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think
Just gut
in
feeling.
some domains, I think in some domains probably.
Mm-hmm.
In other domains, no.
Okay. Because you
So
say
it's
earlier
easier for us to
yeah, go ahead.
good.
Go ahead.
Well, I
Yes.
think it's like it's easier for us to check if we are right or wrong now than ever before. You know, like even when I was sitting as a kid with a thick dictionary, it was very hard to translate and make sure that what I understood from the text was actually accurate. Now, anybody who has access to internet or some sort of like a cell phone, or even some old computer from 20 years ago can probably get a very accurate translation. And that's just like one example, right? In many domains, it's much easier for us to check if we're wrong. Now, the problem is, it's also much easier for us to find all possible reasons why we may be right, because there will be so much misinformation on the internet or elsewhere that you can join all sorts of interesting groups that can convince you that lizard people are ruling the world, and you know, certain groups are bad and other groups are good, and whatever you can just pick. And that's, of course, the danger of the modern, very sort of rich and exciting world that we live in, but also a world full of different opinions that may be clashing with each other. So, I don't know. Because of that, I don't know.
We hope for the best, right? Hope for the best. So, Professor Igor, thanks a lot for being so kind to connect and allow me to have 1 hour of your time to share your amazing journey and the works that you are doing. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for continuing to explore and to research on the topic of wisdom of culture change, so that people like us can make less of mistakes, can have tools that can help us to think better, to relate to another people better, and together we can make a better society in our ability, in our ability to do so. And the works that you guys are doing are important, and we thank you for doing that. Personally, I hope that one day we'll be able to see you in person, either here or in Canada. We travel there quite often anyway. So if that happens, that would be amazing, and we can talk in person.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. You have a wonderful day. Tell your loved ones that we say hello from Vietnam, okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.